Hello, welcome back to the Murakami Companion podcast, a show inspired by the works of Haruki Murakami, where we analyze his body of work in its entirety. Today we'll be talking about Tokio Blues, Norwegian Wood, probably Murakami's best known work, biggest bestseller, the most recommended book of his, often cited as the perfect entry point for new readers. And new readers actually love it. Hardcore Murakami fans often disregard Tokio Blues as a lesser work, even though it might be the book that introduced them to Murakami. Why? It's because it doesn't have magic. It doesn't have an insane plot twist at the end. It doesn't have a crazy life-changing metaphor open to interpretation. It's just a really solid fun book with a more or less linear storytelling about a normal guy dealing with loneliness. Spoilers from this point on. We have our protagonist, who is a young man, with his best friend and his best friend's girlfriend. And they hang around and everything is well, until one day the best friend commits, he unalives himself, as people say nowadays. And everything goes to hell for the protagonist. He's obviously very sad and depressed. The best friend's girlfriend, from now on the girl, she is very sad too. And they go to universities that are close to each other and they start eventually hanging out again. But nothing really happens until eventually she leaves. She goes to a place in the fields that might help her with her mental health problems, implied to be the depression that came out after the death of her boyfriend. So our protagonist is left to deal with his 20s alone. And he meets other people along the way, there's other girls, but he finds it very hard connecting with them. On one hand, there is always the ghost of lost friendship, and on the other hand, it's the prospect of a relationship with this girl that relationship is never consummated because she's too far away. The protagonist is left with a life where he can move forward. Years pass and he's still stuck with the memory of his dead friend and a girl he wants to be with, but she's somewhere else. So eventually he decides to visit her. She is at this sort of mental facility in the middle of a rural area that kinda reminds me of where My Neighbor Totoro takes place. She seems to be a little bit off. It's not a good moment in her life. And the protagonist is actually allowed to stay the night there. That night they have sex. It is almost like it's happening in a dream, but I'm inclined to think that it's real. The next day he has to go back to the city, so they say goodbye. And not long after, he is informed that the girl unalives herself after that. The whole story is told from the point of view of the protagonist in the future. And the book reassures us that he has a happy ending, eventually. Anyone who has lost a friend while they are still young, we know that it's a hard place to be and it's hard to move forward from there. Time seems to stand still in a moment that it's actually long gone. Sometimes you don't know if you should fill the shoes of that person and take care of his memory or her memory, or move on. Both the protagonist and the girl face this problem, The friend care for both the protagonist and the girl. So they feel that they need to take care of each other, but they don't manage to do it in a healthy way because they are both very broken people. We are left to wonder what was going on through the girl's head in her final moments. I think it was both a sense that it doesn't matter what we do to force it, life doesn't move backwards nor forwards to her. You know, she finally slept with this guy and nothing changed. And also maybe there is a feeling that as long as she is in the world, the protagonist can move on with his life. She might feel that she's the last thing remaining that connects the protagonist with the past. Or maybe it was just that she couldn't stand living with her mental health issues anymore. We don't really know. So then the story comes to an end. The book is almost hypnotic in the way that it is written. It's not short, but it feels like a short book, because it is impossible to put down. And yet, in a way, it's downright simple. It's a simple story of love and death, a story about friendships gone, memory, and what do we do with all of that. Our protagonist is always going against the current with the girls he chooses to pursue. The girlfriend of his dead best friend that is on a mental facility, a girl that already has a boyfriend, a woman who is older than him that just happens to work at the mental facility, a random girl he just meets and sleeps with. None of them are, let's say, conservative or safe choices. He seems to be stumbling across his 20s, and that is what the book is about. It's something that most of us can relate to. In your late teens and your early 20s, you believe things are going to go a certain way, and then stuff happens that throws you off the path. For our protagonist, it was the death of his friends. And that it is what Tokio Blues is trying to teach us. It's better to just move on. There's nothing good in that path. You need to just go into another direction. I will admit I was a bit fearful to talk about this book because it's such an important book, but there is also not too much to talk about. I would like to mention two more things. There's a beautiful sequence where our protagonist goes to a certain woman's house, and she likes books, she likes music, and is pretty much the perfect woman. And there's a fire nearby, and they decide not to run, just to accept that they might die there and that those are their last moments, and just to leave those moments to their fullest. And at that moment, the protagonist doesn't seem to be thinking about this main girl who is far away, and he kisses this new girl, and then she tells him that she has a boyfriend. And it's heartbreaking not only because we are rooting for the guy and we are driven to like this new girl, but because the entire day is described as perfect in what is pretty much a very dull life in a very dull world. Personally, this was my first Murakami book, and I was stunned to see the range of emotions he was able to communicate through writing. The students' protest of the time, that they are kinda in the background for the entire book. Like, the book is not about that, but we come back to the students' protest time after time. And Murakami is so critical of it, and it's great. We're describing here in this book the main characters and their lives as students. They do not participate in the protests. Their lives are peaceful and normal. There doesn't seem to be any issue with their education. The protests seem to be interrupting their life in order to fight problems that they don't seem to have. The protests are described as weak and hypocritical. And I think this is something very true. Some ideologies drive people to try to disrupt stuff that works okay just because it's not exactly how they think it should be, and they form that opinion in a one-sided way. Like a classroom that doesn't like math, so they band together against a teacher because they don't understand how math is gonna be important in their lives. Tokio Blues was adapted to cinema with a soundtrack by Johnny Greenwood, who is the guitar player for Radiohead. The basis for the beginning of the book is a short story called Firefly, that was later included in the short story collection Blind Willow, Sleeping Woman. You can get Tokio Blues Norwegian Wood where good books are sold. If you want to support this podcast, or you just like cool t-shirts, or maybe some coffee mugs or art prints, we got a few digital stores where you can find all of that and much more, featuring the cover artwork for this episode, inspired by Tokio Blues Norwegian Wood. There will be one design for each episode release of this podcast.